Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to video game news for Friday, October 11th. Let me tell you how my scheduling tends to go. Today was a perfect example. I woke up a little bit earlier. I may very well wake up a little bit earlier and start streaming a little bit earlier. It was about 10:20 when everything was set to go. And I had the thought, well, I probably should start at like 10:30 and try and have some consistent time. You may take note that US Central Time right now, it is actually 10:41. So I thought to myself, well, I'm not going to sit here for 9 minutes and do nothing. That would be ridiculous, and I really can't get too distracted into another project. Then I immediately got distracted into another project, and that's why we're starting at 10:41. This is my time management skills in a nutshell. And frankly, I don't think it's that even strange. For the vast majority of human history, the concept of minutes per se were useless and also inconsistent and just not known. The clock effectively ruined what was a human lifestyle before. Yes, having consistent time does make some sense, but it used to be the case that you would have like one clock, usually connected in part to the church bells, that would ring on the hour, and so you would just live your life knowing it's generally somewhere between 1 hour and the other. It's somewhere between noon and 1, and you didn't worry about it and you didn't sweat the small stuff. Of course, a lot of jobs back then also would have had you working from sunrise to sunup, or just doing a day's labor, or having bosses say when you arrive and when you leave and exploiting you that way. I'm draining the last of my crystals here on Yu-Gi-Oh! And pretty soon there's going to be an update that I don't have enough gems for. But yeah, with the evolution of the concept of the minute, with the evolution of clocks being more prevalent, just extremely more prevalent, while that may have made for some more efficiency and consistency in many aspects, particularly science aspects, it also just has by at least 60 times increased the urgency and the obsessiveness of clock watchers and people being labeled as being late, and just the whole laid-back attitude that we would aspire for we've been pushed further and further away from it, which I guess transitions very nicely to Nintendo announcing the Alarmio, not Alarm.io, that is a $100, extremely overpriced, in my opinion, alarm clock that can only be used with one person sleeping in the bed for its weird motion censoring function, which is a little creepy that it has a motion censoring function at all. The motion censoring will play sounds if it sees you moving in bed and starting to get up, if it's in that specific mode when the alarm is going off, which isn't really a normal alarm but is instead several different thematic alarms with an LCD screen on the front of it showing some Nintendo character themed characters and scenes. Ooh, ultra rare. But yeah, I was thoroughly unimpressed with that, considering you can spend probably less than 20 bucks to get a really decent alarm clock with a bed shaker, which is what I would suggest. And if you are going to start to think about other kinds of smart alarms, which is what I would really compare it to, you can spend $20 to $30 to get a pretty decent yeah, I don't have enough gems to open any of these. A pretty decent, like, 2-year smart alarm clock that also has a light sensor and a humidity sensor and a temperature sensor built in, which is what I would recommend if you're going to get some kind of device that also happens to have a clock on it, which is really what you're looking for there. If you want to go even fancier than that, you can spend about $60 to get alarm clocks that are smart alarm clocks that have like sunrise functions, so that it simulates the sun coming up, maybe even sunsets functions to simulate the sun going down for bedtime. You can get 2-year based ones of those that also have Bluetooth speakers and FM radios. Usually they don't have AM radios. The Bluetooth speaker and the radio part is not going to be integrated particularly well to the smart device of Tuya. I don't know if there's any like more well-known named brand smart device makers out there that you would point to as far as a smart alarm clock. Like it's not like Eufy or any of the bigger names or anything that would integrate with HomeKit, because in reality, as soon as your kid gets old enough, which is weird that the Alarm EO commercial didn't really show any kids. It showed maybe like a 15-year-old kid, but like in reality, an alarm clock like this would more than likely appeal to very rich kids that were closer to like 8 years old. By the time you're hitting 15, you almost certainly have a cell phone. Then it makes it a lot more sense to Black Myth Wukong here is down to the 7th spot, but then is still holding firm in the 4th spot, holding high at least. Yeah, it makes a lot more sense to have an alarm clock. There are certainly maybe some nicer features that could be built into alarm clocks for cell phones, but one of the things there is if you have the Google clock on an Android phone, you can run Google Assistant functions from that, which means then you can, to some level of success, at specific alarm times, have a smart device turn on, such as any kind of LED lights in your room or any other kind of device, ceiling fans, things like that. And the Tuya service itself has alarm clocks you can set. It doesn't look like your standard cell phone app, a clock app, but yeah, it's the same thought. But yeah, it seems to me like this was something that was developed by somebody of fairly high regard in Nintendo, and that they've been spending a long time on it. The Pokemon Sleep Tracker concept perhaps also was accelerated to push that out and finish this. This might be the first failure on the new Nintendo president's part. It feels like it is the first advertised Nintendo product that is not entertainment really based in an extremely long time. I imagine the Nintendo Store and Nintendo in general have put out t-shirts and things like that, but this feels like the first thing that's actually been advertised. People were expecting an announcement of a Switch 2 which, yeah, they're not going to announce that until at least January 1st. Because they just don't want to cannibalize Christmas sales. And it's too late. You can see Trading Card Shop Simulator seems to be growing in popularity. But yeah, it just looks like a dumb device. I would prefer a bed sensor than a motion sensor. I'm not sure really if the edges of the LCD screen just happen to have an array of passive infrared sensors. That would be my guess is what they're doing, instead of a millimeter wave presence sensor, which is what you really would want. And yeah, if you put an LCD screen in it and you put a millimeter presence sensor in it, then yes, I could see why the price is so high, but most people aren't going to know that, and so the price is still too high for your average consumer. I imagine this is going to be a short run product that they put out and then never mention again. It would be kind of weird if Nintendo went in a direction away from video games. Be somebody else's problem, effectively. But yeah, an actual bed sensor, particularly if you can have it so it can sense different zones, would be way more useful. And a bed sensor should integrate a bed shaker function too, and that's what you really want. Is you want to see, are people tossing and turning? If you're going to do that kind of tracking, you're going to need really good programming for that. I'm not sure that Apple Health or Google Health at this point really have great systems, or anybody really has a great app for it. I know Tuya is coming out with bed sensors. Bed sensors in general can target multiple markets, in the sense that it can be little kids to see if they got up and are out of bed and awake yet, or it can target older people and disabled people. It's like, did this person try to get out of bed because they have dementia and don't realize they need assistance and that they're going to fall, or has this person fallen out of bed? All of which become really big issues. There is some talk by one of the US presidential candidates about adding home health to Medicare, which, if that were to happen, then there would be a lot of products that would try to target home health. And one of the things that home health would need would be bed sensors and fall detection sensors and things like that, for people taking care of elderly people or disabled people inside their home. Hospitals and nursing homes have them, but they're paying a premium for them, certainly, and the insurances, they're paying a premium for them in those cases. So yeah, I think it just overall misses the mark and really has no reason to be connected to Nintendo at all. It almost feels like what they realized is that they'd never made an alarm clock before when they were building the Nintendo Museum, and they thought that that would be a gap that needed to be filled. It also more likely feels like maybe the new Nintendo president has a kid that doesn't wake up. They haven't gotten into any real details as far as, can you really even control it remotely, as far as a smart alarm clock, where a proper smart alarm clock, that would be one of the things you would want it to do. Is you would want alarm clocks in your kid's bedroom that you can set the alarm for without actually going into their bedroom, and see if it has been snoozed and see if it has gone off or not. And then you get into the even creepier side there, where a lot of alarm clocks have cameras in it, and a lot of cameras could act as alarm clocks. But I wouldn't recommend cameras in the bedroom for pretty much anybody. Anyways, even in talking about something from Nintendo, I'm not talking about video games at this point. So let's move on. So our trending still has yet to quite cross over, where Dota 2 will be back into the third position. But by this time next week, that will probably be the case, because if Dota 2 is high up, it will get 2 more points, which will put it over that. So yeah, sometime around next Friday, we will see Black Myth Wukong drop down. Then it's really just going to be this. You can see it's a dead heat right now with PUBG and Black Myth Wukong. So inherently, this chart I've made, while pretty, I'm not sure it gives the best amount of information, and it certainly doesn't dynamically change from week to week, which is accurate and the right thing to do, certainly, because the truth is, the number one games by the most relevant games that people are actually playing, maybe not the most relevant, but the games people are actually playing the most of, doesn't change much from week to week. It is fairly consistent. In fact, at the moment, I don't think there's anything other than maybe Deadlock or Once Human. Those are about the newest things that have happened. Football Manager 2024 here has announced a delay for Football Manager 2025, which might affect the player base somewhat. Either more people will stay with this game or people will give up on the series. Those would be the two major changes that could happen. Lust Arc seems to have had an update. And let's see, Metaphor v Fantasio and Dragon Ball and Space Marine 2 are all games that potentially should have something that people are saying, talking about. This Counterside game, which I tried to get into this many months ago and didn't get very far. It does seem like it is succeeding fairly well. Maybe that is still speaking to a level of there not being that many very good free-to-play games on Steam, and this is a gacha game, so I can see it being played a lot by people, even if it isn't particularly a great game. Speaking of not great games, I have missed many days playing the Cardcaptor Sakura game on mobile, so I'm trying to just finish up the story, and then I'm going to abandon that game, even though they have added several new features, or I've unlocked several new features. None of them are fun, and the core mechanic of the gacha is not fun because there's just not enough characters and elements here. Here they're doing the red background OLED version of the commercial, which is funny because it's the exact same commercial, but they at one point a few months ago changed the background to be red with black text versus white with black text, and then they went back to the white with black text. Interesting. It seems like they just spin it around every now and then. Theoretically, this is the OLED version theming. Backyard baseball. Interesting. They're really old. Backyard baseball is not a new one. And then the community recommendations. Seems like it's gonna stay around. Although I question how useful it's really going to be. Yeah. This is the new Backyard Baseball. Well, no, this is the new release of the 1997 Backyard Baseball. which you could also use ScumVM to play the original version of this, and so it probably is just a emulated version. But I do believe they announced that they are going to make a new one. Yeah. Football, I think, in the United States is losing a lot of fandom, a lot of fans. So baseball may be picking up a little bit of fans. Baseball also is still fairly popular in Japan too, and I think a few other Asian countries. Dragon Ball Sparking Zero, Metaphor Fantasia, all looking good. We can, through these newest games, I guess, sort of keep an eye on what their rating is, but it's kind of hard when you scroll down low enough because they know what you're seeing is the screenshots. And then it's too much work to go up and down here. So that's the new and trending. We also have top sellers starting to outsell the Steam Deck, which makes some sense. Although, you know what, I probably should have this here checked, come to think of it, because Counter-Strike 2 has probably always been on this list, and that makes a big difference. And it's interesting how they draw a line with included free-to-play titles, which does make sense on the top sellers list, because if it's free-to-play, you don't know if that means it's getting microtransactions, and that's why it's a top seller, or if it's just getting downloads, which I think it's just getting downloads. And there's not a lot of popular upcoming games listed, and specials come and go. Yeah. And so nothing new is happening on Steam at the moment. There, I suspect, will be a fall sale. There might even be something in October and November as far as fairly big sales, and possibly even Christmas. They do seem to like to stack those sales quite a bit. I'm overall still not really accomplishing anything. I've been working on a new smart doorbell to replace the smart doorbell I just got. And more than likely I'm going to keep the new one, but it does have some issues. First of all, I have one that I think I probably messed up the programming a little bit on it, but I still think I'm going to be able to use it because they can be in the main room 1 mode, or they can be in room 2, room 3, room 4 modes, or even more, and you daisy chain them as far as the connections. So yeah, I'll probably just make the one I was messing with the third one, the least important one. This new doorbell, I won't get too deep into it, though it has some issues. It claims it can connect to RTSP streams, but it doesn't seem like it's actually programmed correctly to actually do that. I imagine what it can do is detect a small subset of IP cameras, because that's really what it's trying to find. It's not trying to find a RTSP stream from any other type of device like a network video recorder or CCT system, which the whole idea here would be to try to integrate the doorbell in both directions between the closed circuit television cameras and the doorbell. And yeah, you can't do that network wise. I'm gonna experiment to see if I can do it physically wise, by just hardwiring it, because there are a lot more plug-in ports on this doorbell than the one I got just about a month ago, and I'm going to actually send back because it actually doesn't work. It shows the wrong picture in the app, so that leads to just major confusion, certainly. This new doorbell also works as a photo frame somewhat. It seems to auto rotate things that are in portrait mode, which doesn't make a lot of sense, instead of adding black bars and resizing it. And it seems like either there's a naming convention problem with it or something else, because it's only showing maybe 30 to 64 pictures out of 200 that I gave it, which that doesn't make any sense either. And then it cycles back through it. It's not connected to any kind of internet or even local FTP server type setup, so whatever photos you put on the memory card are just going to be the photos on the memory card that it would slide through. It has the ability to add MP3s as ringtones, which is going to be helpful because it doesn't really start off with particularly great doorbell rings. But yeah, also speaking of servers, it has a completely unsecured telnet setup where you just type in root and then you hit enter when it asks for a password, and it just lets you log in. So yeah, that is something I'll have to deal with. I think that there's something I can do to just kill the server after a few minutes of it boot up, and that's probably what I'll do. The Linux operating system that is built on is very stripped down and locked down in a squash FS file system, which means it's a read-only file system, kind of like how the Steam Deck is a read-only file system, except for in the specific folders of the home drive there's specific folders that aren't read-only, so I'll just have to modify it to go ahead and kill the telnet, and that should secure it well enough. The video doorbell does not stream itself as an RTSP server, or even connect to other screens of the same kind wirelessly, which would be nice, certainly. Or is that they do make wireless video intercom screens, and that probably is your recommended things that they would, particularly if they support OnVIF. The problem is these video doorbells aren't particularly popular enough that people are really competing to program them better, and so it might be years, if never, until it gets to a level of programming that really makes sense, as far as all the things that it should be able to do. They're built on, I assume, very old chips, and most of the cameras that connect to it, I think, are actually very much old stock of the cheap camera sensors from years, if not decades ago. Part of that certainly comes down to the signal that the closed circuit cameras and doorbell cameras sends, which seems to be AHD, analog HD, which is not really the sensor, the type of signal you would send to a TV or anything like that, because the TV just won't recognize it. So to do this crossover communication, I have a weird connector called the CVBS on the back of my CCTV system that will just theoretically show what was going out via the HDMI. The problem there is then I need an adapter to convert the CVBS or the HDMI. In this case, I think HDMI is going to work better, to AHD, which is a older standard and not compatible. So another $50 for a converter box. The converters are very expensive. Again, not that many people trying to connect the back of a closed circuit TV to a doorbell, though. So the doorbell is the weakest link and will always be the weakest link until it gets way more adapted. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of the circuitry inside of a video doorbell screen isn't too different from the cheap car head units, music entertainment system units, and I imagine that is why they're still using AHD also. But yeah, it's a real shame. And I'm assuming that the tablet screens send out the same AHD signal as what they're looking for. And yeah, if none of this works, then I'll still have a doorbell that at least slightly works. But that's what I've been working on in the past couple days. Although I've also been distracted with a lot of other stuff, and this minor emergency still just not slowing down. I am now also in the worst phase of shopping as far as Amazon or any big sales place, in that I've spent the money. I know the budget's blown, doubly blown if not triply blown at this point, but I'm also not receiving any of the stuff until a few more days, so I don't have any of the stuff to actually work on or enjoy it. So yeah, it's all the misery of being broke and none of the fun of actually having the items. But yeah, noticeably here, before we get into the video game news, none of that had anything to do with actually playing Punch Club and getting back to that, which I need to do, or recording, or making YouTube Shorts, or even uploading YouTube Shorts, or scheduling any other videos. My YouTube channel is flailing at this point as far as scheduled content. I need another 50 subscribers to get over 1,000, and I need about 3,000 more watch hours to actually get monetized. And at that level of monetization, even if I did get approved for the YouTube Partner Program, which might just never happen either, I imagine you're going to be making like $100 every 6 months at most. Not any kind of livable wage, although maybe it would. Theoretically, because of the YouTube Shorts, 5,500 people watched my content last week, which that number is pretty big. But it's certainly not big enough numbers to make real movement. And we're certainly on the verge of Google potentially being broken up, which could make YouTube considerably cheaper and just reduce the payout on the YouTube Partner Program, or reduce people in the YouTube Partner Program severely. So yeah, it's hard to be hopeful for anything. Anyways, moving on from that warm-up, let's go through the Video Games Chronicle articles. I did change my macro, and what I changed did seem to fix whatever problem we were having, where it was just closing all the tabs at some point. I just went backwards to the last thing I changed and then removed any close commands. I'll have to research it more, because that will leave a few extra tabs open, like maybe just one, but yep. There's a thought there. The PlayStation 1 game Star Wars Episode 1 Jedi Power Battles is coming to PC and console in January. it's an enhanced re-release with new playable characters and new features. Is that where we have gotten now, where they are just reverting to trying to have nostalgia for episode 1? I don't recall this game. I mean, it looks fine as for a PlayStation 1 era type of game. I would have to assume that this maybe was spearheaded by Aspire as far as they made the game and they want to re-release and make some money on it, and maybe Disney doesn't really care too much. At a certain point, it would be only fair for them to let some bad re-releases of bad Star Wars games. I'm not sure this is actually a bad Star Wars game come out for as many bad TV shows and movies that they've released around Star Wars. It's a series of older Star Wars games being re-released by Aspire. So there's going to be several of them. And it's probably pretty easy to emulate PS1 and do that. Now, we don't have really a lot of news today. Partly I imagine that's because I started earlier today, but also it's Friday, so I'm not really expecting there to be any late afternoon or even mid-afternoon announcements. Football Manager 25 has been delayed until March of 2025. It was supposed to release next month. Football Manager is really not the kind of game that should be in such an awful state that you would have to delay it, but apparently so. So that's surprising. It does imply to me that there should be some fairly big changes between 24 and 25 for such a delay to make sense. Oh, I should also mention that non-Steam Deck launchers has apparently been told it's going to be kicked out of the Decky launcher, the Decky store, and unless this person's GitHub was hacked, which is a possibility, the person, I think his name is Roy, has said he's just going to step back away from the whole project and stop working on it as much or at all. Now, I also know that there's another project that probably followed fairly closely in parallel to non-Steam Deck launchers as far as a script, and so perhaps with that coming out, maybe that's why, or maybe there's something else about the Decky store that they're trying to clean up, or what. But it does seem like a weird situation, and it does seem like being kicked from the Decky store is probably not a good enough reason to full on say I'm stepping back from this project, unless it was a case where the Decky store was actually charging money for non-Steam Deck launchers and the script was just free elsewhere. That would be the one thing, is that if all of a sudden it looks like you're gonna lose any money you were making, then I could see why you'd step back from it. Frankly, you don't really need to go so public on stepping back from projects. You can basically just abandon projects and respond if anybody cares or asks where you went months, years later, potentially, or just not respond if you actually did abandon the project. Video Games Chronicle team is returning to print with the 2025 Guide to Video Games. Here's an advertisement that's not actually news. Well, I would assume that this is more of a gimmick than anything, scheduled for release in February of 2025, and it's a book, not just like a seasonal catalog of here's what we would recommend you buy for Christmas or something, which is what I thought it really would be. So yeah, this is just a advertisement for somebody coming out with a book, but in the preview here is showing Luigi's Mansion 2 HD, for instance, and so its relevancy is going to be fairly limited in that you're just talking about recent games from about a year ago, would be my guess. Here you see PlayStation, Xbox, Nintendo, and PC. But very quickly, the Nintendo Switch may not look like that. The PlayStation 6 or 5 may not look like that, and the next Xbox may not look like that. I could see some of these websites putting out just paper catalogs, certainly, but that's about it. And it would almost have to be sponsored by somebody like Game or GameStop or Amazon.com or Walmart Plus or something to just pay to print it. To actually ask people to buy a book talking about video games is a little unnecessary. I'd also have to admit that I don't think Video Games Chronicles' quality of reporting is particularly that good that a book would make sense. This might very well be a chicken and egg scenario, or monkey see, monkey do scenario, where Jason Schreier's book, which probably has more relevance and reason to exist as far as Jason Schreier's book Play Nice, just came out, and so maybe they're just jealous and saying, well, if Jason Schreier can sell a book, why can't we? Tingle's creator reveals who should play him in the Zelda movie. I would really love for him to appear, says Takuya Imamura, which is that the person in Heroes? Is that this guy, or is this just some kind of weird comparison where they took Tingle and tried to match an image of a pose here? Not sure this actor actually is doing too much these days. Does Tingle really need to show up in a Zelda movie? I would say no. I think that's a huge mistake. I think Tingle in particular is well known for being hated, but if you were to just take a step back, all of the assistive character devices are there for video game reasons, to help you out and drag the plot line forward and just make it easier to understand the basics of gameplay. When you get into the idea of a movie, you don't need a character that would just tell the plot to you or force a character along or anything like that. Like, you might have a quest giver character in a movie very quickly tell you what to do, but after that you want whoever's going to be playing Zelda to be prominent and be self-motivated, not drug along by a Tingle character. This is the case. So yeah, Masaoka is who he would want to play Tingle, which is a reference to Heroes, which is a reference to a very old TV series at this point. So yeah, this guy would be fairly old now and not really in the consideration as far as characters you'd have play. And that might also be a statement as far as just how much Imamura watches TV or watches Western TV. And he may just have a very short list in his mind as far as Japanese actors that speak English well enough to actually be in a Zelda movie, and so he might be limiting himself severely to just what are some Japanese actors that actually would work in Hollywood. Here is the Alarm.io is now available in Europe for £90, 100 US dollars. That speaks. The British pound has just gotten horribly devalued from what it once was. It used to be that pounds were worth like 2.5 times a US dollar. Now they're barely 1-to-1 on the ratio. But yeah, I don't know if I've seen a screen in this size that is completely round, but they certainly do have like watch screens that are round, and so it is kind of crazy to have this square screen and then just a huge amount of bezel. Again, maybe the bezel has just passive infrared motion sensors all around it. Looking, you can see there's a Wi-Fi signal here. You can see that there is a male symbol. I'm not sure what the male symbol is going to do unless it just connects via app to a phone, and that just means you have notifications. We can see that there's a nighttime symbol, which maybe means there's a light sensor and the screen dims. You would hope that's the case, but unless this is an OLED screen, you're probably not going to get deep, dark, inky black images, and even on this image, that does not look like a OLED screen. So the backlight basically needs to go off at a point, and the bird chirping, I assume, means that there is some kind of different modes. I know there's a steady mode and then there's a progressive mode as far as the alarm goes. And then it seems like it shows an alarm at all times being set. I'm not going to go over it all over again, but it is not something that really interests me. In fact, it's something that kind of irritates me quite a bit as far as what it is. It's currently also only available to Nintendo Switch Online subscribers. I also think I heard a rumor of some beta signups for a new Nintendo Online server type version, which, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if the online system is being upgraded to make it so there's a better experience there for the next Nintendo console. Clearly they need to be more online with their system and embrace online quite a bit, and they've yet to really succeed at that. Not sure I really want a notification, like a little envelope of notifications on my alarm clock. That seems directly contradictory to the idea of using an alarm clock and not being distracted and going to sleep. Although I guess at a certain point the Alarmio is completely just a distraction and a screen that would stay on and keep you up more, possibly maybe for a minute or two. It's just not really what you want. I'm a little surprised that nobody has made a really cheap sleep tracker that is just a wristband that would shake your wrist and wake you up and just not have a screen on it at all, and would track if you're tossing and turning like a pedometer, things like that. They've made expensive versions of those, certainly, but they haven't made cheap ones, and the prices haven't gone down. Let's see. Following its EA split, FIFA is now partnering with Konami for esports. The old rivals will collaborate on FIFA World Cup esports, or FIFA World Cup esports. I'm not sure what the E here is, whether that's a typo or what. So Konami, I always want to say after Konami, Konami is Konami, and they're the worst. Jim Sterling transitioned to a female character. I'm not sure if it's a work or a shoot, to use wrestle terms, but after that she disappeared in relevancy and popularity. She went too wild, too crazy, and I've seen a couple other YouTubers do that too. They just get so much into the shenanigans and antics of that other YouTubers have done in the past and had some success for it, Logan Paul type stuff, although maybe not to that extreme, and then they just get too wild, and once you go crazy and wild, you lose any credibility, and it's very hard to gain that back. Also, I guess Jim Sterling kind of ran out of things to talk about, even when he was in his heyday. The anti-Konami stuff was getting very repetitive, as it were. It was just kind of getting ranty. That being said, it does seem like, to me, Konami is trying to do better and actually make games once again, so this may be a new Konami versus the old Konami, but also they don't seem like they're doing a particularly great job in-house at the moment. Metal Gear Solid Delta will be a great barometer as far as how good they can make remakes and how good they can license games. They may very well have just gotten lucky with Silent Hill 2 and Bloober Team, and they may find that we may find that a lot of the other Konami games are going to be fairly disappointing. They're fairly low effort. Well, it says FIFA E here too, so I guess FIFA E means something. I mean, yeah, they've got a whole logo here. Soccer, or football as it's known around the rest of the world, is very popular in Japan, so I could see an element there. This is a bad picture because it seems like the photographer has intentionally told them to stand in front of this mirrored FIFA symbol, or this fake mirrored FIFA symbol, which I don't think it's fake mirrored. I think it's 100% mirrored, and there just happens to be a nice green forest behind them that they could have been behind anyways. But yeah, you never really want to take a picture from the angle of from a mirror where you can get a reflection. It seems to me like you've got a reflection either of this person, or you've got a reflection of the cameraman themselves. And then he's also told this guy to lean, which you never want your character to lean, to try and match the height of the Japanese Konami guy here. I assume this is the Konami guy, this is the FIFA guy, which does not work either. Particularly if you're shaking hands, which also, shaking hands and crossing the body like this is kind of weird for a photo. So yeah, pretty bad photo there, which might also be your first tiny hint as far as the quality of the next FIFA game. Although it might be better if soccer games like FIFA did kind of fail and the audience that was playing FIFA for an entire year found some better games to play, but I also don't want to yuck anybody's yum. So if you are a gamer that just likes to play FIFA games, by all means, just play FIFA games. Looks like I might be having a little bit of network trouble right now. Hopefully that doesn't evolve into larger bits of trouble later. So yeah, here we have the story I was talking about before, where Nintendo has announced a mysterious Switch Online playtest for a new feature. Members can apply to be part of the test, which will take place this month. The new feature, I suppose, could be anything. It could have as many as 10,000 participants. And I guess since there's no other hard things to talk about there, we should leave it at that. Let's see. 4 new Apple Arcade games have been announced for November. I think this is something we had already talked about. Wheel of Fortune Daily and Arkanoid vs. Space Invaders Plus. Also Texas Hold'em Poker, Pokerist Plus. I guess maybe Drive Ahead Carcade. We'll leave it at that. And then that will be all of our articles for today as far as Video Games Chronicle, and we'll move over to the Gamatsu articles. Tomb Raider 4, 5, and 6 Remastered have been announced for all consoles and PC, due out February 14th of 2025. So a little bit of a wait in a couple months, but this is where you have more of a harder time engaging with the original Tomb Raider series, I think, because it is the Darkness trilogy, and so they feel a little bit off here. You can see you're really not getting the iconic light blue, light green shorts and brown pants. You have more military pants and black tank top here, and then you have just full-on wetsuit here. They were churning out the original Tomb Raider games so fast, and so many different teams were working on it. So yeah, that it's kind of the rough parts. And so you have Tomb Raider The Last Revelation, not actually numbered, Tomb Raider Chronicles, and then Tomb Raider Angel of Darkness. But yeah, they definitely were also leaning in towards the idea of making Tomb Raider games try to feel like movies, like Indiana Jones movies in particular, since that's what they're ripping off for the most part. So when you come from the idea of let's make a video game series that's like a movie series, that opens you up to the thoughts that you can change things more drastically and have more of a cinematic approach to storytelling where things change drastically, whereas video games tend to really need to stay about the same, and it's not like the gameplay mechanics here changed drastically either. You're still climbing and dropping down and running and shooting monsters. It is still just 3D platforming with a little bit of puzzle solving, with a little bit of run and gun shooting. I don't know what to do here as far as the... Yeah, I don't know what to do here as far as the network is going. At one level, I could end the network. It's just getting worse and worse as far as drop frames. I just don't know. What's going on? Seems like it is pretty typical in the past to have. Let's just hit retry here and see if maybe that's part of the problem. I haven't been noticing that Yu-Gi-Oh has been disconnecting a lot earlier these days. It's just like after a small period of inactivity, it disconnects, which isn't a terrible thing and should improve network traffic, not decrease it. But yeah. I suppose what I have to do here, now that I think about it, is we have to sacrifice Twitch. I dual stream the Twitch. That has worked fairly well in the past, but in this case, if we need bandwidth, we've got to sacrifice Twitch. So I'm going to stop streaming on Twitch, and if anybody actually is watching me on Twitch, apologies. Hop over to my YouTube account and subscribe and watch there in the future. That's really where I need views anyways, so sorry to the Twitch viewers. Meanwhile, while that is going, I am noticing that Twitch says it's getting about 6 megabits per second, where YouTube is getting like somewhere around 1500 1.5 megabits per second at best. So yeah, this will take about 30 seconds to kick off. Alright, that seems like that is done. And we'll see if the bandwidth improves any on YouTube. It may not. I may just... This might be an ingest server issue that needs to be changed around too. Yeah, it doesn't seem like that's improving anything. We'll just have to move forward and see how that goes. I believe after this point, I could be wrong about this, the next chronologically released Tomb Raider game is a remake of like the first Tomb Raider game. So at that point you're getting you're talking about remastering a remake, which I don't think really makes a lot of sense. They certainly aren't buying themselves the most amount of time they could, because you could certainly be dragging this out and re-releasing each game individually very cheaply to buy yourself more time for whatever the next Lara Croft Tomb Raider game is going to be, which one would hope is going to be something interesting and new and different, and just reboot the whole idea of who Lara Croft is, which at a certain point they are also kind of uncertain as far as who is Lara Croft and what is her character supposed to be at all. Indiana Jones, as an example, is an archaeologist that has this detailed backstory with his father and his history that gets revealed with the first 3 movies, and his life somewhat even progresses in between each movie too, so there is not as much I think I could really say about Lara Croft. And they tried to give a bunch of interesting characters when they rebooted Lara Croft with this most recent trilogy, and those interesting characters in that first game mostly disappeared and were forgotten about. Most of them died pretty quickly in the first game, and they've over-focused on Lara Croft just developing a personality by surviving through the events of the first game, which I don't think that worked particularly well. Also want to see the new game lay off the bow and arrow concept, because as a gimmick it's fine, but it's just not particularly that good. Anyways, we'll leave it at that, and I guess we're gonna have to leave the network issues where they are. This does just seem like this is a YouTube thing. We're up to lots of dropped frames at this point, and I don't see how anything I could have I did caused that to happen. I mean, we could, I guess, exit out of this and see what happens there, and then we'll just go quiet, see if that improves the network at all. It doesn't seem like it's going to. Honkai Star Rail version 2.6 update annals of Pinkanese Mapu Age launches October 23rd. That is a mouthful. It is, I guess, a case that Honkai Star Rail and maybe one or two other mobile games, or mobile first games, have caught enough people's attention that they are still putting out press releases for every update. Noticeably, Gamatsu is not reporting on, either because they're not getting press releases or because they're choosing not to report on them, probably because they're not getting press releases. Updates for other games, certainly. The Pixel Disney Mickey Mouse game came out, and I launched it for about 5 minutes and didn't even get through the tutorial before I was bored. I might go back to it at a different time, but probably won't. Memento Mori is still getting updates frequently, every couple of weeks of some sort. Usually it's not major updates, it's maybe a new character or cycling in and out old characters. Even the adult game Tinkafuma I play gets that new content or cycled in old content as far as updates go. Most mobile games don't make a big deal about the updates that are available, so there is a thought there, certainly, that you shouldn't advertise updates on games, because that's just going to constantly happen. Is it possible I lose my train of thought more when the music is not playing in the background? That's an interesting thought. Anyways, let's try and rush through this. This will be a nice experiment as far as anybody that wants to give feedback onto, could I do these streams in complete silence, and would that really work? Or does that backing music actually help? I imagine the backing music actually helps. I shouldn't really just be running Yu-Gi-Oh! Though. I should have my own backing track just running in OBS. That would make a lot more sense and save on resources. Of course, it would also stop me from launching Yu-Gi-Oh! ever again. The game date, everything has been delayed to February 14th of 2025. Isn't that Valentine's Day? So that seems more like a strategic plan. At a certain point, wouldn't it make sense to... It should have always been the plan. So you see this picture with a whole bunch of Valentine's Day chocolate and things like that. And I wonder if at some level when they say date everything, they mean everything including the chocolate. But yeah, this looks like this is some kind of mermaid character. This seems like this is a character, and this is a character, and this is a character. So there are several kind of monster-like creatures, it looks like. Yeah. I almost want to watch the trailer here, but I am almost wondering if that is also the problem. That pressing play led to some video playing here and led to the bandwidth. I can see that it looks like my ad blocker is just kind of constantly blocking a new ad on these pages, like every second or so. It seems like it's going up. Yeah. This is a crazy collection of characters and things, it looks like, or personified things. Metaphor ReFantazio shipments and digital sales have already topped 1 million. The Persona 5's team new fantasy RPG launched today. This might explain a lot, certainly. I didn't know the Persona 5 team was involved in this. It explained the hype quite a bit. And if Metaphor ReFantazio is a new starting point, then you don't have to get into the deeper backstories of Persona 3, Persona 4 to play something like Persona 5. Nor do you have to get into the really deep backstories of the Shin Megami Tensei universe, from which one of the endings creates the Persona universe. Which that's probably more of a loose connection than an actual connection worth noticing. But yeah. It may very well be the case, if I ever did get around to playing a JRPG, that something like Metaphor ReFantazio would make more sense, and that we've fairly transitioned away from it being relevant to play Final Fantasy games into being more relevant to play Metaphor ReFantazio or the Atelier series. Dragon Quest, I think, is still probably relevant, but a lot of other JRPGs perhaps not so much. That being said, there also might be a widening divide between the Japanese super long JRPGs and shorter JRPGs that are more beatable. Something between a 200-hour plus game and a 60-hour game using the same mechanics. Particularly for me, a 60-hour game is much more appealing than a 200-hour game. Let's see. Former Disco Elysium developers have established Dark Math Games to develop detective RPG XXX Night Shift. Interesting. Sounds like an adult game, unless it's supposed to be connected to the XXX movie universe. Speaking of ratings, yeah, these screenshots not really telling me much. The rating for the Cardcaptor Sakura mobile game, which I'm quickly going to give up on, has been updated so it is rated T for teen by the ESRB, which that alone tells you how badly they've missed their mark, because clearly the Cardcaptor anime series is one of the few anime series that should be rated PG, at least PG-13. T for teen, you're talking like 15-year-olds. 15-year-olds are highly unlikely to want to sit through Cardcaptor Sakura as an anime. They'd be much more interested in something like Dragon Ball, something more violent, or even if you were going to go more the magical girl thing, Sailor Moon Crystal makes a lot more sense, and things like that. So yeah, undoubtedly it's got a T for teen rating because you can't have microtransactions in PG-13 games. I'm not sure if that's actually true by the ESRB, but I know there is some limitations in other countries' rating systems along those lines. But yeah, again, you've just missed your mark completely as far as the game goes. Former Disco Elysium developers have established Longdu to develop a psychogeographic RPG spiritual successor. Yeah. So it's going to be a spiritual successor to Disco Elysium is what they say. Of course, it says former Disco Elysium developers. That may not be all of them. It's important to kind of point that out whenever that's happening. Spirit X Strike demo for PC is now available. It's a combat-centric action-adventure game. I was watching a podcast, and there's a husband and wife team interviewing someone, and the person they interviewed, the wife started to talk about how much she played video games and how good they were video games, and they were just like, you know, baiting each other and sort of starting to set up a play date in which they'd try and defeat each other and beat each other in games. And the husband just totally, who hates video games and doesn't play them, went quiet for like 5 minutes. And I guess that's pretty much how conversations would go in the real world too. But as far as a podcast goes, that there perhaps should be some better way to keep everybody involved in the conversation. Or yeah, but I don't know how you've done that. I definitely have seen podcasts where you have 2 or 3 guests, and a lot of times one of the guests will just check out on entire conversations, if not check out on entire podcasts. Sometimes they'll get upset about something and just go completely quiet, or even leave. And yeah, that certainly is a case where having more people on the podcast might make some sense to cover the dead air. Of course, if somebody is actually getting upset by the current conversation, or just completely uninterested in the current conversation, there's still a chance they may just leave and feel not included. But in general, these are also podcasts where people are just kind of talking about almost nothing, and so there's no real theme. If there had been a specific theme, or like how did this get made is a great example. Like if somebody is going to be assigned to watch a movie and talk about that movie, they know what they're getting into from the beginning. They're not going to leave the conversation because of that. Whereas a lot of podcasts also just, let's talk about the news in general. It probably would help to have a general script as far as here's the things we're going to talk about, handed out to people before the fact. That would probably help too. Yep. Still just getting really poor connections on YouTube. And so nothing's working here. If I was to stop the stream and then restart the stream, we possibly could do that, and then at least I'd still have the recording. So let's see if that works. If not, apologies for for this stream ending abruptly, but I think I need to do something and actually try instead of just hoping it's going to get better. So I'm going to stop here. Maybe a second stream would start. I don't think that would be the case. But yeah, let's see. Okay. Am I starting the stream again? The delay is stopping in 7 seconds, which I could have discarded the delay. And then I'm going to click, I guess, manage broadcast again. Select existing broadcast, resume interrupted stream, it even says. Alright, let's see if that works. Now we're waiting 30 seconds to see if the stream starts. It should start in about 13 seconds now. So I guess this is what other live streamers do when I see them like stop and start, and you probably jump cut at a certain point, and then we'll see how that goes. Alright, well, it seems to me like that fixed it. Okay, so we'll see how that turns out, but if everything works that way, that is, I guess, the new procedure. That's probably a procedure I should have learned a long time ago, as far as just stopping streams and starting streams. Inherently, this means I didn't need to close Yu-Gi-Oh! And I didn't need to probably close Twitch. But yeah, we're not dropping any frames now. So I should address that quick and early if I notice it. Although, in fairness, I don't notice it. I imagine I haven't noticed it many times. Anyways, back to video game news. The Rise of the Golden Idol launches November 12th. It's an award-winning detective saga returning. I don't recognize this game, though. Also notice that it doesn't seem to me like this is it doesn't seem to me like any of these games are curated. Rise of the Golden Idol. Is there another game? It says the award-winning detective game returns, uncover the truth. So if we open that in a new tab, the case of the Golden Idol. Ah, I see. So there was a game called The Case of the Golden Idol. You can see the visuals here are fairly rougher than the visuals in this screenshot. Although, not too different. It definitely seems like in this game, it's less of a point-and-click adventure than what this looks like. So, okay. It's a sequel. I'll have to double check to see why these games are not being curated. It seems to me like they should be. No, it's not that they're not being curated. It seems to me like it's not opening new links, Steam links. Taito Milestones 3 launches December 10th in the West. Like here, somewhere in here. Well, not in this one. Tabletop gaming inspired co-op tactical adventure game called Thunderfolk has been announced for the PS5, Xbox Series, Switch, and PC. Not the PS4, not the... Well, I guess at this point nobody's really releasing games for the previous Xbox games. See, like this Steam link should have been clicked on. There's been several mouse games, by the way, that have come and gone, and I always keep my eye on them to see if there's kind of a story there. Redwall type stories, but it doesn't seem to me like they ever really sell enough to be relevant or worth playing. An open-ended minimalist RPG called Everhome for PC launches November 11th. Cozy, but not too cozy. I've also noticed on Slick Deals a couple of Steam games have just been given out for free. I'm going to play a video and see if that all of a sudden drops my network connection down. And certainly it's a weird situation when you see a game for free. A lot of times they're rated fairly well, but they're not the kind of games I would normally play, and so I'm grabbing them anyways. But then sometimes they are rated particularly poorly, and then there's no real reason to even grab them if they're free. I'm not trying to clutter up my Steam library with a bunch of garbage games. Yeah, Everhome here. Not really showing too much there. Seems more like a Stardew Valley type game than an actual RPG game. I guess the balances there can be fairly different. Lost Eodun's Veil of the Witch for PC launches in early access on November 5th. Guess I'll leave it at that. Yeah, when the Gematsu links are not being clicked on, scrolling down takes a little bit more time, and that's what I'm trying to avoid. We already talked about Football Manager 25 being delayed to March 2025. MechWarrior 5 Clans is coming to Game Pass on day 1. Okay, I'm not sure the MechWarrior series is going to be a great seller in the West, but that's an interesting thing. I guess the question here is MechWarrior being published by somebody that is actually owned by Microsoft? Not as far as I can tell. So, yeah, guess I'll leave it at that. Slime Heroes launches in Q1 of 2025. The updated PC demo was available from October 14th to the 21st. Tetris Forever game list has been announced, featuring more than 15 games. These would be all variants of Tetris. Like a Tetris for the Electronica 60, Apple II, the Bulletproof Software 88 version for the Famicom, the Hatris game. I'm not even sure what that is. Hatris, perhaps. Let's see. Hatris Game Boy, Hatris for the NES in 1992. Most of these have been published by Bulletproof Software after the fact. And looking at the screenshots there, and just looking at the still frame here, not expecting it to be particularly too wild as far as the types of Tetris games. New Aero Fighters game is in development after 27 years. A presentation event is set for November 8th. I have no idea what the Aero Fighters series is. If it's 27 years old, it's very possibly it's a shoot 'em up style game, or very possibly also a Japanese only style game. I haven't seen any like anime girl propaganda join the Japanese self-defense force stuff recently. 4 or 5 years ago, seemed like there was some of that going on, certainly. In fact, I think I just saw an article where the mayor of Shibuya said foreigners don't come to Shibuya for Halloween and that the roads are going to be closed. They were upset with the foreigners leaving trash on the street and being drunk on the streets, drinking on the streets. So, yeah, and it's questionable what foreigners they really mean there, whether they mean Westerners or just Korean people, Chinese people, things like that. And certainly it's also kind of questionable whether it wasn't just the Japanese also contributing to the drunkenness and the trash on the street. Like, inherently, the Japanese jingoism and propaganda loves to embrace the idea of blaming the foreigner. So if there happened to be one foreigner in the crowd and then there was 100 Japanese people making trash or getting drunk, they would blame foreigners anyways. Mayors in particular, politicians, are going to say random crazy things, particularly in Japan. The whole politics system, I believe the entire lower Senate, whatever it's called in Japan, was just dissolved and called for a new election. So seems like there's just going to be some major changes as far as who is in charge in Japan, although there may not be particularly major changes as far as how things get done. And it likely won't really affect video games in any ways. So we should move on. A side-scrolling beat-em-up game called Vengeance Hunters launches October 28th for the PS4 and 5, Switch, and PC. Let's see. Do we have this on the follow list? Haven't done any follow list cleanup, but it's still a decent system to just mark whether or not you've made a YouTube channel on it. And so that's going to move us over to the Gaming on Linux as our new news source. And since I told it not to close any tabs, this first one is going to be here open. The Humble Store is having a big sale on handheld hits, cheap games for the Steam Deck. Here they have a list of games if you wanted to buy them from the Humble Store. Now, inherently, if you're buying them from the Humble Store, I assume you're getting a Steam key. Otherwise, it doesn't make a lot of sense to say that they're Steam Deck focused or compatible. They may be technically verified in the Steam version, but the Humble version would, and the Humble Store in general, would be difficult to install games directly. Talos Principle 2 being 40% off is probably one of the kinds of games that should always be 40% off. The Internet Archive was hit with a DDoS attack and hacked with 31 million accounts being hit. From what I had heard, there is a small possibility that this message that it was hacked with was just injected via a less severe security hole, and so it might very well be the case that the 31 million accounts aren't actually hacked or not. But then they're saying they're going to put those 31 million accounts on Have I Been Pwned, which we'll see Certainly, there is also a question as far as who made accounts for the Internet Archive and for what reason, and would you have really given them a password that you reuse somewhere else or in an email that is your main email address? I'm noticing more and more these days that if I even just give my phone number to a company, like they seem like they immediately will give their phone numbers over to spammers or advertisers. It's very possible just your local mom and pop shop is taking people's phone numbers and they're just inherently hacked, and that's leading to spammers. Of course, you never really can tell. It might just be random stuff too. But yeah, I got a obvious fake thing saying a package was stuck in customs. And yeah, that's just ridiculous. Let's see, Ubuntu 24.10 and Kubuntu 24.10, which Ubuntu and Kubuntu are basically the same. They just have different desktop environments, and other Linux flavors have now been released. Although I would say these are Ubuntu flavors in particular. Some big changes including the latest 6.11 kernel, which is most of your drivers, along with canonical shift to a more aggressive kernel version selection policy going forward, automatic kernel crash dumps, GNOME 47 with various additions to the desktop, and Wayland by default for NVIDIA. Here's a picture of what Ubuntu looks like. Yeah. It's important to point out though that all of these are just Ubuntu variants, which are based on Debian, but Ubuntu versus Edubuntu are almost exactly the same. There's just education software installed by default. Kubuntu is KDE, Lubuntu. I'm not sure what that one uses. I'm not sure what Ubuntu Budgie does. Mate or Mate is a different Windows system, another desktop. Studio, I don't know what that is. Unity, I don't know what that is. Some of these might very well be rolling releases versus long-term support releases. Cinnamon is a different desktop system. Yep. So it would probably be very beneficial if they had a screenshot for each of those different systems to show how they visually look different. But the biggest difference there is going to be what software supports what kind of desktop, followed by the more immediately noticeable where is the start menu and what is the layouts and how do the windows look. Gaming on Linux with Apple Silicon is now becoming a real thing. Which I don't know what that really means. Oh, it's not gaming on Linux, a website. It's the concept of playing video games on Linux with Apple Silicon is becoming a real thing. So the Asahi Game Development Toolkit has been announced, which brings together Vulkan 1.3, graphics drivers, and x86 emulation with Windows compatibility using Proton, amongst other things. So these are compatibility efforts to make video games work on, I assume, the latest Apple Silicon M3 chips, M4 chips. I'm not sure what they're up to. No, M1 and M2 chips. They're not even up to an M3. At a certain point, it used to be the case that you could run Parallels and dual boot into Windows on Apple products, but I guess with the M1 and M2 chipsets, that's no longer something that can be done. And even then, I don't think it ever was a good scenario to play games on Apple. Inherently, I think if you're buying Apple desktops or even Apple tablets and phones thinking you're going to do anything other than the minimal elements on it, you're probably wasting your money. Sure, if you like Apple iPhones, get an iPhone and just use it for the minimal, and then have a PC for your gaming and the more hardcore stuff would be my recommendation. Or have a Steam Deck for gaming, might work too fairly well. But yeah, buying a MacBook is really just ridiculous at this point. Buying a tablet to do any hardcore work on it's pretty ridiculous. The earbuds, the iWatches, and all the accessories are all fairly overpriced in my opinion. And the HomeKit system and their support of Matter is not particularly great either. Apple inherently, anything once you get into the Apple infrastructure, is just going to give you less options and cost you more money. Not to be an Android fanboy here, I kind of would like a new Linux-based phone operating system not involved by Google to come up, but that probably would never happen. You certainly could have de-Google-fied Androids. And yeah, if Google does get broken up, maybe Android would be one of the companies that just becomes its own independent company. Although at that point, I'm not sure if that would be a good thing or not, because you might just start seeing a whole bunch of ads on Android operating systems. The first Steam Deck plugin on Steam will bring Good Old Games and Epic Games compatibility. In a really surprising move, the developers of Decky Loader plugin Junk Store, which provides the ability to install games from Good Old Games and Epic Games, are bringing the plugin to Steam officially, which also might very well explain why the non-Steam Deck launcher script, which installed a lot more than just Good Old Games and Epic Games Store, is being delisted from the Decky plugin. More direct compatibility, less having to install Decky loader in general might very well be what Valve wants and what more people want in general, just to have it more recognizable. Still don't think I would really recommend, though, dealing with 3 different companies legally as far as where you would buy games. Good Old Games, Epic Games. I still would suspect Epic Games might shut down their whole storefront at some point, and Good Old Games is always going to just have a limited list of games that you would really want to buy there. They said that the Valve was going to have an announcement in Australia, and from that we now know that the Steam Deck is officially coming to Australia in November. It was a long, difficult process, I guess, to actually release the hardware in Australia. Yeah, and I could see why there might be some legal reasons that they struggled with to get it compatible in Australia, and there might very well have been just shipping reasons. Notably, it's worth pointing out that Valve partnered with Komodo to sell it in Japan, Hong Kong, South Korea, and Taiwan, so I wonder if Komodo is also going to be shipping the one in Australia. But yeah, I assume the Steam Deck is available in Europe, but I also suspect that there's large swaths of the planet where Steam Deck's not really available. I wouldn't be surprised if there's no official stores selling it in any of Central or South America. Pretty sure they are selling it in Canada, probably selling it in Mexico. I wouldn't be surprised if there's no official store selling it anywhere in Africa or the Middle East, there might be like one storefront that sells them, but I bet it's not official in countries like Saudi Arabia. Steam Decks in general would be nice if they were being sold in the airports of very rich countries, but that's a weird audience to target. I would assume most of Europe does have official ways of getting a Steam Deck. But yeah, if it's taking them this long to figure out just shipping, that might also speak to how long it's going to take them to figure out manufacturing and scaling up. So yeah, we do know that they have already made a Steam Deck as a finalized product, but that might speak to the prototyping and the development of a Steam Deck 2 just taking longer. Particularly when we're talking about Valve, and in the case of Valve, there's a decent chance that only a few people are actually hyper focused on the Steam Deck, and as such, they may be splitting their time between handling shipping and selling in different regions versus developing the next console or negotiating how to build the next console, the next Steam Deck, which we're assuming is called the Steam Deck 2. It doesn't inherently have to be that. Hori also came out with a Steam Deck compatible controller without a screen or a touchscreen or anything like that, just a wireless controller. I don't know if there's really anything special about it that is worth mentioning. It did look like it had maybe some touchpads and compatibility with the extra buttons that a Steam Deck tends to have, but not being an official Valve product, I'm not particularly interested in it. Let's see. The next story says you can explore a top secret uranium mod in the retro first-person shooter Carvac, which I think we'd already talked about that. Conwards 2 is a sweet game about writing letters to real people. This might be a case where all of the articles from gaming on Linux are going to be opened up always. But that doesn't inherently have to be the case. I just need to work on the programming some more. The FEX EMU version 24.10 is bringing out some important fixes for gaming on ARC64. This is an emulation layer that allows you to run x86 and x86-64 binaries like games and apps on ARC64 Linux host. So that would be fairly specific, unique processing chips that your hardware would have to have, not your standard AMD 64 chipsets that most PCs would have these days. Descent 3 Piku engine is now open source, building focused on quality of life improvements. Interesting. And then SDL 3.1.3 stable API preview has been released. These are older stories. Steam Beta came out and fixed issues with game recording, remote play, and more. Block Factory is basically a Lego factory automation game with diorama building. Yeah, these are old stories. Although, kind of big stories, Red Dead Redemption and Undead Nightmare coming to PC on October 29th is a big story, certainly. Zoom Platform Store announces a new tool that runs Windows games on Linux with Proton. This is not even the software I was talking about, and it's another effort to do the same thing. So it does seem like there's highly motivated, at least 3 or 4 groups of people trying to find ways to get Windows games to run better and other launchers to run better on Steam. Proton Experimental fixes up issues for Final Fantasy 16 and multiple other games. A full list here, it seems. And then Pairs and Perils combines deck building and dungeon crawling with a card matching memory game, which I would never try to play that. That'd be terrible. Space Marine 2 fixes online for Steam Deck but may need launch options on desktop Linux. Fanatical gives you another chance to build up your Resident Evil collection. And all Steam games sold in Germany will now need an age rating. Game developers have a deadline of November 15th to ensure an age rating is provided if one is missing. From that date, games simply won't be displayed to Steam customers in Germany. Notably, it would kind of make sense for Valve to just force a deadline like that on all game developers for all regions, and then anybody that doesn't bother to give some kind of age rating like anything without an age rating should probably be not displayed going forward on Steam. That would get rid of thousands and thousands of low effort asset flip games where people just won't bother to complete a questionnaire. It would also help you pinpoint any games that are just not really being managed at all by anybody. And that brings us to the GameDeveloper.com stories. Tequila Works laid off a small number of staff after canceling the project. Most of these stories, I bet, are old too. So we now have two sources where every single article is just going to be opened up until I fix the programming. There was a report that Roblox inflated user numbers and downplayed child predator presence to investors. Ex-Humble Games staff form a new publisher, Good Games Group. Paradox leaders say overconfidence led to undisciplined decision making. Little Big Planet 3 and all of the series DLC are going to be delisted from the PlayStation Store after Halloween. New India Near Studios, founded by ex-Bethesda, BioWare, and Naughty Dog devs. Detroit Beyond Human has sold over 10 million copies over 6 years, which at that point, if you're over the 5-year point, it doesn't make a lot of sense to even mention it at that point. Sure, you want to celebrate over 10 million copies, but it takes you that long. That's more of a trickle success than something to celebrate. The Saudi Wealth Fund is considering increased stakes in Japanese game devs. Notice that they put a screenshot of Breath of the Wild there. Saudi Investment Fund, I don't think it's going to be allowed to increase its stakes by much, if any, in Nintendo. I think Nintendo is a private company in particular, so I don't think anybody can invest in Nintendo in the first place. 343 Industries rebranded to Halo Studios and picks Unreal Engine 5 to revitalize the franchise. Fireaxis has struck up a partnership with the Shawnee tribe for sincere representation in Civilization 7, which is an interesting story. I wonder what the actual outcome of that will be, if much of anything. Antstream Arcade conducts small layoffs in a strategic shift in focus. There's a report that has been updated here that says Ubisoft shares have gone up by 30% following a report of a buyout. So that's a great way to get a bump in your shares, is just float a rumor that you might go private, or that anybody would otherwise be interested in buying shares, because then that adds a perception of value to the shares, which then increases the actual trading value of the shares, because the demand has gone up. Yeah, and there definitely have been times in the past where somebody has owned shares in a company and they've gone private and then they've gotten paid a decent amount of money. But yeah, 30% higher following the report is still severely lower than what it has been at its peak, at least for Ubisoft shares. And then being a French company, I assume you have to own French shares, and that they aren't just traded on like the New York Stock Exchange. Guess I'll leave it at that. Agro Crab shares early prototypes of another crab's treasure. Guess check out that article if you're interested. From Software raises base salary for graduates in Japan by 11%. That's really old stories at this point. Yeah, most of these I think are fairly old stories. So let's just burn through them fairly quickly. Again, I'm still trying to target 2-hour streams. I'm not doing a great job today. With the music not playing too, I wonder how well my microphone is picking up myself and the noise. Yep. My house has gotten, I think, fairly noisy. It's time to change the air filter whenever the air conditioner comes out. Yep. Indie publisher Shoreline Games launches to put system-based games on the map. Yeah, these are all old stories still. Alright, so that's going to bring us to all the new games on Steam. And so let's burn through these fairly quickly and then we'll be done. So, do I want to promote something called 4Q? I guess I'll give it a chance. Thornfall is already on the follow list, so I suspect I guess I should leave that. Then here we have a, looks like GameDeveloper.com article, Throne of Liberty netting over 3 million players in its launch week. This is, I guess, a Prime game. Haven't heard anything about it, but it does feel like it is in that Tolkien-esque fantasy era. And for better or worse, it does seem like Amazon Prime is trying to play in that Tolkien-esque fantasy style of storytelling, even though it doesn't seem like too many people are really watching or actually care about Rings of Power. It may just be enough. Inherently, I would assume that streaming services like Amazon Prime are going to just come to a realization that it's not worth going all out on the content they make. It's just going to be a case where they need to make content. So, doesn't matter if it's particularly great stuff, it's just got to keep people on the platform streaming for a little bit longer. Like they've already, on Amazon Prime Video in particular, moved to advertisements and ads, lowering the quality of the presentation. Junior's Party Adventure. Dora the Explorer is in that. And honestly, I think that is the direction most people should probably go as far as streaming services and content creator. Here's another adult game that shouldn't be viewed. The curation's just not happening. I don't know why. But yeah, it's another game that, at least this one doesn't have nudity or lewd tags, sexual content tags, things like that. The AI art, I assume it's AI art. They're trying to lean into that. In the old days, in like the 90s, a game that looked like this would have been much more acceptable. I don't know if you can really have throwback games though that have such a weird art style to it. It's retro in a very different way. But yeah. I lost my train of thought there as far as what I was talking about. I think I'm being fairly generous today as far as what I'm giving a YouTube short from. Cat Girl Chess is not going to get a YouTube short. Does this support English? We're still very much not at a point where there's anything big to be surprised by. Some games like this, like Starship Troopers, it's an online co-op game. It's rated very positively, but also I'm not going to ever play it, so I'm going to take it off the fall list and the wish list, because personally I wouldn't play it, even though I do think it is seemingly a good game. This is some kind of launcher. It almost feels like a mod to Doom, because yeah, the images don't look completely the same. That's an interesting consideration, whether I should highlight launchers or not. I guess I would highlight it. I guess we're starting to get to the point where we're seeing more horror games. Sparking Zero is very positive, so we can go ahead and put that on the wish list too. Yeah. I wish my air conditioner was quieter, but I would never sacrifice anything to make it quieter as far as its actual ability to air condition. Probably wouldn't be a terrible thing if I went out and just hosed down the compressor on the back end. But yeah. Thinking about putting an activated charcoal filter on the air register that takes the air in. See if I can catch smaller particles, although probably can't. I'm already using MERV 14, very expensive algae filtering filters. And the best thing you can really do is just have your fan constantly cycling air around. Man, there's just nothing really here. That is my alarm clock. Which probably means I actually do need to do something. Come to think of it, the schedule's changed slightly, so starting earlier and doing all of this would have to happen even earlier than what I did. I probably should have started around 10 in Central Time. Maybe that's too early. I don't know. I have no clue. Seems like people watch at random times and random days. Let's see. So let's just hurry up and finish this. Then I will move on. I should have probably given that a chance. Well, I guess I was talking about streaming services and videos, and yeah, the difference between YouTube, in my mind, which is just full of a ton of content, but none of it's particularly great content. It's not anywhere as polished as something like an episode of the Boys, or even the Fellowship of the Ring, whatever, Rings of Power series. Yeah, it's Rings of Power. It's the name of the series. There's just a lot more money and time and effort put into that, where for many cases, just being halfway between your average YouTube video and your average high quality tentpole TV show, that's probably where you should be. Well, this is positive, but it's an MMO. Well. But yeah. There probably should be the occasional tentpole series, but when you look at like Netflix, they've very much gotten away from needing to have high quality tentpole series. They just are making random stuff. Nobody has really made the argument so far that there's too much garbage on Netflix. They made the argument about password sharing crackdowns, and they made the argument about the prices going up. But here we have yet another clicker. We're still seeing these show up. Prime TV, on the other hand, Prime Video with Freevee has a lot of content, but it's all too old. And so when you actually go for new content and look for new content, it's actually a very short list of stuff you've probably already been suggested before. In fact, I would say Hulu is even better about just getting new content. This looks a lot like another game that LucasArts made a long time ago. What was the name of that game? This artwork is partially AI generated. I feel like they may have AI generated a story based on that game. Well, this is a weird thing. I'm not going to make a YouTube short on something that uses AI generation, but I do want to keep an eye out for it. And I guess I'm not really in a rush today, so even though my alarm clock went off, I think I am going to be able to just make it all the way to the end of all the new games, which wasn't that far away anyways. Okay, well, today's been an interesting stream, I suppose, in that we closed Yu-Gi-Oh! We went 2 hours and 10 minutes without taking a break even. We ran into network issues, and perhaps I've learned what I should have learned years ago as far as how to fix network issues. But yeah. And we've been talking in silence this whole time with no backing music. So, see, any feedback on that would be greatly appreciated, although I'm almost certain people aren't going to like it. Anyways, that's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching. Thanks.